Welcome back. You're listening to Houston Real Estate Radio. Today we've got special guest here in the studio from Chicago Title. We're going to be talking about some things that you need to know about your title insurance. Not just title insurance when you're buying and selling a home, but more importantly, depending on where you are in your life. Because sometimes, you have problems. You're getting divorced. You're getting married. You're having kids. You're remarrying, and now you've merged families. And so we're going to talk about some of those issues today. I've got the Vice President of Chicago Title Houston here, Steve Sapio. You've heard him before on the program. He's joining me again today. And Susan Strickland, commercial closing attorney. She's here in the studio. And when my agents over at Register Real Estate Advisors have problems, we always call Susan because she's the one who can help us get us unstuck when we're stuck, when we have problems. She's great. Always lends a helping hand. You can reach them over at the Chicago Title office at 281-469-8200. They're really great at title insurance, but also answering those questions you have when just getting to the closing table. It takes a lot to get to the closing table these days, doesn't it, Susan?
Sure can.
We've had some. I thought we were going to have to... we had to pull them kicking and screaming to close them, didn't we? I want to talk a little bit about the difference between selling a property without a will and with a will, because I know that gets complicated. Really, here in Texas, it's probably better to have a will, don't you think?
Well, it's better to have a will in the sense that if you've got that will, it expresses exactly what your intentions are, and there's no doubt about it. The thing to remember about a will, though, is just because you have it doesn't mean that it's going to be operative. Until that will is actually probated in a court proceeding, it is not effective. And so many people say, what is probate? Probate itself is the presentation of that will to a court, public notice that the will's been offered for probate, then there will be testimony as to whether or not that's truly the last will and testament of the deceased. If it is, the court finds that property passes in accordance with the will. That's why it's important.
So the will it's a written document of your wishes that you file with your attorney, but until you get it in front of the court and they all agree and establish that it's your last will and testament, it really is just information.
That's exactly
not
right.
in play until it goes into probate, right?
That's exactly right. And once the will has been admitted to probate, there's an order that the court gives saying the will has been accepted for probate, then that's when it's operative.
Okay, I think that's important for people to understand, because you hear people all the time who say they have a will, and it's kind of like, that's great, it doesn't do you any good till it's really probated.
Exactly.
And a lot of people, because we're a community property state and it passes from the husband to the wife upon death, or the wife to the husband upon death, they don't get it probated until the last spouse dies. Have you seen a lot of that?
Yes, we see that very often.
And then the kids have to probate both wills at the same time.
The time that it is important, there's two different ways property passes. One is by the will that's probated. If you have a will and don't probate it, or if you don't have a will at all, then Texas has a statute, a law that says this is who gets your property, and that when property passes that way, it's called passing by operation of law. And an interesting thing is whether the property passes under a will or by the statute, the actual ownership of the property vests in whoever inherits immediately upon the death of the deceased person, even if the will isn't yet probated or you haven't established ownership any other way. Ownership vests right at the moment of death.
All right, so let's talk about trying to sell a property when you haven't probated the will. Just out of luck.
No, there's something you can do about that too. I did say that there is law in Texas that says how your property goes if you don't have a will, or there's a will that's not going to be probated. That's what's called the law of descent and distribution. What you do in that case is get someone who knows the history of the deceased person and who's closely connected with the family, could easily be someone who does inherit. That person gives an affidavit setting forth the family history of the deceased person. There also needs to be 2 what we call disinterested witnesses, people who have known the deceased person but will not benefit financially from the sale of that property.
Okay.
And so all 3 of those join together in what's called an heirship affidavit. The facts of the history of the deceased person are set out, and when that document's filed of record in the real property records, then the world's entitled to rely on that as a statement of fact as to how ownership of property passed by application of that law. And just real quick, the easy way that it works is since September of 1993, if you are married and one spouse dies, then the other spouse inherits the deceased spouse's interest in the property unless the deceased spouse has children that were not of the marriage that spouse was in at the time of death. So that's the most common thing you see. The next thing is, hey, there are more children than the children of the marriage the deceased spouse was in at death. And in that case, the children, every one of the children of the deceased spouse, inherit the deceased spouse's interest, and the surviving spouse keeps their interest.
Okay. A big thing to note is if there's children from coming down the line from different sides of the family, you better have it all set up.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, children really complicate things when you have them coming in from different marriages, don't they?
It's a very interesting dynamic. And it is possible to disclaim property that you have inherited, but you do have to do that within 9 months of the date of death. Okay. And so that's a separate process too. Sometimes people do that.
Let's talk about when someone, people go through divorces, they sell their properties, but sometimes they want to sell the property they're in and go ahead and go buy something else. They can afford it. They need to move on out of where they are and get established, especially when the kids are in school. They want to get into that neighborhood where there's a certain school. What do you need to know when you're doing that? Because I know it's important that you know how to do it, or otherwise you may have your spouse you're divorcing on your new house.
Well, and to an extent that may happen in this limited sense. Remember that until you are divorced, you are still married. Mm-hmm. So all marital property rights still exist. It's a presumption that property acquired during marriage is community property. So it is possible for a spouse who is acquiring property and in the midst of a divorce to that creates the lender's interest in the property. They will have to sign that deed of trust to encumber any marital property rights that they might have in the property. That occurs as a matter of law. And it doesn't matter how much you say, we will never get back together. This is, until you're divorced, you are married, and you have to be treating things that way.
Susan, sometimes when people get a divorce, one spouse wants to keep the house and the other one just buys them out. When that happens, what should they do after everything's final? How do they make sure that they are the only ones on title, that is their house? I know they have a divorce decree, but and the funds have been paid for the spouse to buy them out. But how do they make sure it's all resolved?
So many times we'll come across a chain of title, and the last deed will be the husband and wife, and we'll find a divorce of record. Mm-hmm. And there will not be a deed filed in the real property records. And this becomes a problem because if you're not given third-party notice in the real property records, you're not establishing title in the real property records. And a few other serious issues that come up from that is any debt incurred by that other spouse before you've given that third-party notice can be attachable to that property. I've been chewed out a few times about that. When you get somebody on the phone at the closing table and they say, well, I got all this debt on there, it's not mine, it's my ex-husband. Mm-hmm. I know, but we didn't actually show that the property was changed hands in the real property records till a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
And all these abstracted judgments were filed, and they're not going to be happy.
So how do they fix that? How do they keep that from happening? What do they physically have to do?
You want to read your decree, okay. Obviously. make sure that your decree has a legal description, not an address, not a tax tract number. Make sure that it could operate as a document that can be filed in the real property records and pass title to a piece of land lot that you can find on the ground.
Okay.
File the deed of record. And usually your lawyer will require that you file a deed of record from one spouse to the other. Make sure that gets filed of record immediately.
Okay.
If that's not available, file the decree of record, and that'll take care of the problem.
All right. Thanks so much. Great information from Chicago Title Houston. Steve Sapio is the Vice President of Chicago Title Houston, and Susan Strickland is the Commercial Closing Attorney. We appreciate you guys coming on. Love to use your Cypress Wood location. That number, if you've got a question, 281-469-8200. That is the main number to the Cypress Wood location, the one I like to do a lot of closings at. And I appreciate all your help, Susan, because I know you like to help me and my clients out and get us all set when we're getting ready to close. So I appreciate that. I know you guys work a lot with commercial and residential properties. Y'all stay busy.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be right back here on Houston Real Estate Radio. We appreciate you listening. And if you missed any of today's show and you want to catch it online, you can watch the video at HoustonRealEstateRadio.com.